Welcome everyone to the 51st episode of Everyday Channel. With me tonight, as usual, is our co-host Bob Wang.
Yo, yo, yo.
And we get a special guest tonight, Mr. Eric Landon from, I think, originally Oregon, but now based in Thailand.
That's right. Hey, everyone.
How's it going, guys?
Pretty good. Pretty happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. Exciting week for Magic, Pro Tour, Bob's article, and the mulligan changes.
Mythic Championship, sir.
Sorry. I still don't know what any of these new names are.
I noticed that, like, on the I was about to say Pro Tour, they retconned the Pro Tour in a way. Like, everybody's now a Mythic Championship 5-time top 8 competitor or everything. Except for the Hall of Fame, I think.
Yeah, you know what's even funnier is Brian David Marshall, like one of their main coverage guys, who's unfortunately he's leaving, but he's still doing this last MC, if you will. But he was like messing up the names a little bit because he had to keep switching between like Pro Tour, Guilds of Ravnica, and Mythic Championship Cleveland. So I thought that was funny.
It's
confusing.
At some point I was wondering, like, maybe he doesn't even care for the name change anymore. Like, I just feel like every time Rich Hagen, who's been around forever, has to say Mythic Championship, I feel like he's dying on the inside a little bit. He just pronounces it in a way that makes it sound hilarious.
Yeah.
But yeah, in true fashion of this podcast, we decided to have Eric on, primarily because he's in a time zone that we haven't had on before. So, like, for Eric, it's like pretty late in the evening, whereas for Bob, it's like rather early in the morning, I guess.
We're exactly 12 hours apart.
Yeah, if we had Matt on, it would actually be like 6 in the morning for him, but he couldn't really get up on a Sunday morning this early. So he can't tell us about how his Siege Rhino deck fared that we talked about last week. But from the intel I got from him, he went, I think, 4-2. He actually almost made top 8 at his local tournament, with a deck containing Back to Basics, Veteran Explorer, and Path to Exile. So I was a little bit worried how that deck would work out, and I'm still not 100% convinced, but, like, Matt somewhat made it work, I guess. Guys, what have you been playing this week, Matt? Bob, what would you say is, like, your primary deck? You've been on, I think, 4-color Loam for a while, and then I saw you play something else. I can't really...
Yeah, no, so I played 4-color Loam back in Richmond, which was, like... It was like summer of last year, so it's been a long time since I played that deck. Some people have been asking me, like, do I like that deck still? I think once the Miracle started playing Accumulated Knowledge, the matchup got a lot worse. They also stopped playing Mentor, which made it, like, even harder because Entreat is almost impossible to beat. But now it seems like they're back on Mentor, so I think the deck is better again. I've been playing many different decks in Legacy. There was a period around GP Shizuoka that I was playing Slow Depths, and that deck was really, really good for a period. I think the online metagame, at least, has adjusted somewhat, so that deck is no longer great. So it just feels like Legacy is incredibly balanced. I think there are a lot of decks that you can go out and play to like a 65%, 70% win rate. And I know Eric disagrees with me here, so we can definitely discuss this, but it's in my feeling that, like, kind of the best decks in Legacy now are still probably the blue decks, but, like, by a very small amount. So, for example, I've been winning about 70% with Delver. I think Miracles is probably maybe a 70% win rate deck. Whereas I feel like the Chalice of the Void decks are really good, but I would put them at maybe 65% win rate decks. The key difference being, I think it is harder for a player to pick up Delver or Miracles and hit 70% than it is for a player to pick up Chalice and hit 65%, if that makes sense. So then you might have the perception that, like, oh, this is a 65% deck versus a 60% deck if you're winning more with the Chalice decks. So that's kind of how I feel about the format, but I think it is very, very close to being completely balanced.
Yeah, you just touched upon that. You actually wrote a pretty long or very well researched article, I want to say, on Channel Fireball. And to provide people who haven't read the article with, like, a small introduction, I'm going to read out the conclusion that you got in the end. Quoting, "All in all, Legacy is the most diverse place it has been since the printing of Delver of Secrets, and possibly ever. I expect we will look back on this time as an exciting era of Legacy where you can really play anything. Just be ready to interact as early as possible if you wish to continue slinging the best cards in Legacy." And that article actually was, I don't want to say surprisingly controversial, because your articles are probably always, like, controversial to a lot of people. Sometimes I feel like people are maybe not even reading the article. They're just like, yeah, fuck that guy, or like, yeah, he's right. But you drew like 170 comments on Reddit, and I don't even know how many on Facebook. But people were also calling like for a lot more of your articles, and I think the overall feedback was quite positive. Like the most upvoted comments were of people that agreed with you. But as usual, like people also don't always agree with it. But I have to say, I'm feeling very much the same about Legacy right now. There's some things, and we talked about that like in some of our chats, that I'm feeling like I would enjoy Legacy even more if Griselbrand was gone. And I guess it makes sense to invite Eric, because Eric is basically the master of Griselbrand. He actually knows how to operate Griselbrand the best.
Maybe not for show and tell, though. That deck plays Griselbrand as well.
That's not your thing? You want to get
really.
like the raw Griselbrand?
I like to take it out of the graveyard.
You like to pay 1 mana or 2 mana. 3 is just too much.
3 is way too much.
So, I used to like primarily on Black Red Reanimator.
Recently, I've been mostly playing the Grixis Phoenix deck, actually. Last season, the Magic Online seasons, I stopped playing on my main account and started playing on like multiple different accounts to avoid having difficult game ones with Black Red Reanimator, and that was like super successful for me. Bob got muted there. Oh, that's because the dog was barking.
Yeah, Bob doesn't like Griselbrand.
I was like, whoa, what just happened? Anyway, that was really successful for me. That worked really well. I had to buy a bunch of different accounts, though, and it is a little bit annoying, like, changing accounts all the time. And then they announced that they were going to make it so we could hide our username, so I just, like, told everybody what my accounts were, and then now they haven't done that. So I just, instead of making more accounts, I've kind of just stopped playing Reanimator, because it's way more difficult when your opponents mulligan to the cards that are best against you, knowing you're on Reanimator. And I think the Phoenix deck is really good, and I've been doing pretty well with it, although I can't get through as many leagues with it as I could with Reanimator. So that's what I've been playing mostly.
Yeah, I see you're pretty much, I think Mats Ole overtook you today. He's got like 30 trophies. You're on 12, I believe, unless you got in like one in the last couple hours.
No, I did not.
Are you looking to compete? Are you actually looking to grind it out just for bragging rights? Because like my notes say, ask Eric about trophies.
Well, not really. I try not to focus on it too much. Part of that, I mean, that's kind of why I use the other accounts too. I don't really like feeling like I need to get trophies. I don't know. The trophies are silly. I mean, it's cool at the end when you have more than everybody, but I just like to play a lot, and if I'm winning, I end up with trophies. So
yeah, I guess also if you get a lot of leagues with, like, I think you told me like Black Red Reanimator, you can finish a league in like less than an hour or something. Yeah,
I could get through a league in as quickly as like 40-45 minutes, and as long as an hour.
Maybe you can actually write some bot or some AI that actually like plays it for you, because like the sideboarding is almost always the same from what I've seen. Like I actually also played it on Magic Online, and then like the game ones can maybe be the same. Then you just let it play like 24 hours a day, and if you come ahead like even a little bit, if that covers electricity, then you're good to go. Yeah,
like a Reanimator bot that pays your rent. That would be pretty sweet.
Griselbrand pays my rent. That's the way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is really funny. And since we're on the topic, I kind of do want to talk about it a little bit, is the kind of trophy leaderboard. So I agree with Eric. It's kind of just like another thing that like can be interesting to point to, but doesn't necessarily mean anything. The people at the top are often the people who play the most. And usually the people at the top have a good win rate, but it doesn't mean they have the best win rate. But I did want to point out that like kind of the top decks that everybody is playing on the trophy leaderboard, just to get a little bit of a sense of what people who are winning a lot are playing. And so it's like one thing I keep track of from time to time. So looking at the leaderboard now, we have, let's just look at maybe like the top 6 decks or so. So Mats Ole is first with 13 trophies, and I've been talking to Mats a fair amount. He was the one who really like was my tutor for 4-color loam, because he played that deck a lot. So he's been playing that deck. He's been playing Cleric Stompy, which is like Leonin Arbiter, Containment Priest, Eldrazi Displacer based Stompy deck. Then he's also been playing a lot of Sylvan Plug, and he said that he felt like well, this is the last time I spoke to him like a week ago. He felt like Plug was the best.
Really?
Yeah.
In the format?
Well, he said that if he had to go to a GP, there's a good chance he would play Sylvan Plug. So maybe I'll try it at some point. what I like about Sylvan Plug is that you get to play Mox Diamond, Ancient Tomb, and Green Sun Zenith as accelerants. So that really hits that critical mass of accelerants that, like, I think maybe Eldrazi and Moonstompy play, but like no other Chalice deck have quite as many 2-mana lands or similar accelerants. So and basically Trinisphere is really good now. Or it's always just really good on turn 1, and I think that's what people playing Moonstompy realize as well, and they're playing 4 in the main, which makes complete sense to me. So Matt's lays in first, Eric's in second, playing a lot of black-red, and some Grixis Phoenix, as he mentioned.
Mostly
and then third
Phoenix,
place.
actually. I only have like 3 trophies with black-red.
Sure. And then Lewis also tied with Eric, and he's been playing, he told me almost all of his trophies, or maybe all his trophies, are with Grixis Delver. Then going a little further down, we have Dan Ward, who's been playing Sneak and Show, Mauler, who has been playing Delver mostly, but a couple other decks in there as well. And then Balenciaga and Boba, who's been playing Esperblade and Blue-White Delver. So, yeah, a decent mix at the top. Not as much combo. I guess Phoenix is combo. It's a little bit of a hybrid combo, but a fair amount of Delver and I guess Chalice from Matsole, but yeah.
It's interesting to me that have you actually ever seen a season where like guys who primarily play Miracles finished in the top 3, or even like Grixis Control?
Stefano got second last season, and he plays almost exclusively Miracles.
Was it proper second, or like I think you showed me in Beijing that like all your accounts combined had like.
I took myself out of the race.
You were too good. You didn't want to like discourage people.
When Sensei's Divining Top was legal, I'm pretty sure most of the leaderboard was on Miracles. Even though it was like so slow to play, the win rate was like 75 or 80%. So it was just like, okay, you can still like, and people were just like frustrated playing against it. So I think people just scooped early in a lot of cases because it was so damn good.
I'm wondering, I've got the numbers pulled up in your article right now, and what sticks out to me, like, first of all, we have to mention that it's a lot harder to keep track of the winning deck lists because Wizards of the Coast has changed the way they publish deck lists a lot over the last 1-2 years. But I think, Mob, tell us a bit about your methodology. Blah. The way you put this together. You've been keeping track ever since 2013, I believe, like for 6 years now, of the top decks in Legacy.
Yeah.
And for the last period, you have a lot of data, actually.
Yep. So I avoid competitive leagues because Wizards essentially they follow a formula where if your deck is 15 cards different from anybody else's deck, they post your list. But it's not a good representation of the metagame because like Grixis Delver will only be posted once when there might be like 4 or 5 O's. So I avoid those. I basically only look at Magic Online Legacy challenges, and I also look at in real life paper events with 8 rounds or more. So most of the data is going to be from Magic Online. I'm looking right now. It was about 392 lists from Magic Online and 197 lists from paper, so about double is influenced by Magic Online. Overall, though, I say between paper and online, it's broadly similar. The difference is basically 10% of players in real life who play like Delver and Thalia, those two kind of macro archetypes, 10% of those are replaced online by players finishing well with Grizzlebrand decks, Tendrils decks, and Dredge. So more combo online, which I find kind of interesting. And actually, I want to get your guys' take on this too. Do you guys think this is, like, first of all, I guess, do you think this sounds about right? Second of all, do you think this means that those combo decks are better, given that the online metagame is ahead?
I think the data doesn't really mean a whole lot. I think that good players are going to win with decks that they find they win with, and there are a lot more grinders online that play Storm, for example. There are some Dredge players online. There aren't that many in paper that are like, you know, top tier Dredge players playing all the time. But there's like a couple people that play Dredge online and do very well with it. A couple people who play Storm online and do very well with it. And so that's the results you're going to end up seeing.
I feel that like one difference is that people feel more comfortable playing decks like Storm or like more technical decks online because you really can take your time. You don't have to worry about anything. And we've been there when like your A&T opponent like has been thinking about his play for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then he gets off on like this super complicated play that you probably couldn't like come up with on paper. And also overall, it's easier and more comfortable for like, I want to say like mid-tier players, like people who know the format but who are not like super dedicated to it, to just like even like borrow a deck or put together a deck and then randomly play it at a paper tournament and maybe even do well with it, as opposed to picking up something that's more technical, like we mentioned, like Dredge or Storm combo overall. I think that's one reason why people are slightly more biased towards playing combo online. But that's like a explanation I would give you after the fact. Like if I had not known that it was like that, I would probably not have come up with that.
Yeah, my other explanation potentially could be that like it makes more sense to grind leagues with combo, and then if you're going to play a challenge, you might play the deck that you've had the most experience with recently grinding leagues. What were you going to say, Eric?
Yeah, no, like basically what you guys are saying. Like for example, I know Orem67, who plays all kinds of different decks online, is also well known for doing very well with Dredge and top 8ing multiple challenges and things with Dredge. And I mean, I'm not going to speak for that person because I don't actually know, but at least like for me, I would have never bought Black Red Reanimator, but it's very easy to try it out online, you know. And then if you find that you do pretty well with it and it's fast, you might jam more leagues with it, and you might become more and more confident with the deck and find yourself playing it more and more, and end up placing more or playing it in a challenge or top 8ing 2 challenges in a row with it.
Didn't he actually win 2 challenges in a row?
Win 2 challenges in a row, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think basically what you guys are saying. I think that's way more likely to happen online than it is in paper, unless you're like really rich and you just buy all the decks.
Sponsored by Card Hoarder.
Right.
Yeah. I find in paper, like, there are a lot of people who, like, myself included, like, for example, I own almost all of the blue decks, but, like, if you're going to ask me to, like, build Dredge, I'm like, okay, I just don't have those cards.
Right. That's exactly where I was at. I had basically all the blue decks, and I could shuffle around different blue decks tournament to tournament, but I wouldn't have ever, like, dedicated an entire, like, amount of money to a combo deck, until I did. But that was because I played it online.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of the combo strategies generally play more unique cards. So although the cards are cheaper, it's kind of more of a hassle to go out and buy them. So that could actually be another underlying reason.
Yeah.
Are you saying people shouldn't play Gaia's Cradle in their young Pyromancer decks? The synergy is there.
Whoa, Julian, you just blew my mind. I didn't know this was a possibility.
I mean, it snowballs at some point. I guess you gotta make use of the extra mana. There's ways to do that. But actually stood out to me was that like the most deck played in the period you looked at, which is like Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Legends, is Miracles at only 9.8%. Like I still remember, like way back in the day, people called Canadian Threshold the 9% deck, because it used to be the most played deck, and still at any given tournament, on average, only 9 people, yeah, right, 9% of people played Canadian Threshold. And we've seen higher numbers over the last couple of years, and maybe those were a little bit influenced by Magic Online, because I've seen like top Miracles go up to something like 20, sometimes even 25%, whereas right now it feels much more balanced across the board. Like the second most played deck is, I think, Grixis Delver at 8.1%. And then actually, like the most played combo deck is Sneak and Show at only 5.6%. So the 3 most played decks would be Miracles, Grixis Delver, and then actually, oh wow,
Grixis Control.
Grixis Control at 6.5%. So nothing really stands out all that much. And even though, like, actually, I gotta say, I do like the new Miracles, but it being at only 9.8%, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable representation of the power level of the deck. Like, I would still rank it like it's one of the best decks in the format, but it doesn't like feel outright like as the best deck. I couldn't even tell you what I feel like the best deck. What do you guys think? What are like the top 3 quote unquote best deck? I always like try to avoid that nomenclature. I like to call it like the strongest decks, the most likely decks to succeed at a tournament are.
Yeah, or maybe just like highest win rate decks. So you made a good point about how like balanced it is. Another thing I keep track of is kind of the top 70% of decks. How many decks does it take to hit that 70% of the metagame? And right now in Legacy, that number is 16. And in Modern, a format many people consider to be extremely diverse, that number's only 12. So Legacy is even more diverse than Modern right now. And in the past, Legacy, to hit that top 70%, it could be like 5 decks when it was like really just consolidated on Miracles and Grixis Delver. But even the top 3 decks that we're calling right now, like Miracles, Grixis Control, Grixis Delver, that's only under 25%. So if you think about old Miracles versus the top 3 decks now, it's like that's crazy that that's about equivalent. So going back to your question, though, like what I think are the kind of highest win rate decks right now, honestly, I think everything's extremely close. I still think that Grixis Delver is really good. Like you asked me earlier kind of what decks I was considering. I've played a bunch of different decks kind of leading up to GP Niagara Falls and SCG Syracuse. And I think there's a good chance I'm just going to play Grixis Delver. It has the fewest weaknesses out of any deck I've tried. And it has like some decent matchups as well. So I like Grixis Delver. Other decks that I really like, it's so hard because everything's so close. I really think like the 7 decks that have done the best recently on Magic Online, just like most recently, I think all 7 of them are really good. And that would be Grixis Delver, Storm, Miracles, Sneak and Show, Depths, Death and Taxes, and Moon Stompy. I think all of them are really strong. I think almost all of them have like 1 or 2 major weaknesses, other than Grixis Delver. But in exchange, Grixis Delver doesn't have as many like great knockout punch matchups either. So I think all 7 of those decks are really good.
Eric, how do you feel about that? Like, would you take? Do you feel proficient enough and the power level of Phoenix being good enough for you to play it at the next Legacy GP if you were to go? I actually don't know if you're going.
I think if I were to go to a GP tomorrow, I'd probably play Phoenix, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do. I think it's really good. I think it's really good that there are fewer instances of the deck just failing itself than there are with Reanimator. So I'd probably rather play that at a GP if I were to go tomorrow. But as far as like best decks go, I kind of look at the format a little bit differently than Bob, and I also don't think that the banning of Deathrite Shaman has actually changed anything. I kind of see the format as being like there are 5 types of decks you can play, and I agree with Bob that probably the Chalice type of deck is at like 65% probably if you play it the best. And if you play the Force of Will Tempo type of deck, which would be like any of the Delver strategies, you could reach, about 70% or so. I mean, online maybe a little higher, but like let's say at a GP, you could expect to do around 70%. And then the other 2 types are Force of Will control decks, which I think are slightly worse than Force of Will tempo decks. So Force of Will control decks would be like Grixis Control or Miracles. And then the last 2 types of deck would be Chalice decks. So Chalice plus whatever type of threat you like to play, which could be the Moon version, or there's 4-color control or 4-color Chalice. There's the Moon Chalice, and then there's Eldrazi. And then the last one would be like turn 1 or 2 combo decks, so like Storm, Reanimator, Dredge, these types of decks.
Earlier today, I actually played against the Spanish Inquisition.
Nice.
It's been a while.
So I don't think that any of that has changed with or without Deathrite Shaman. Like Grixis is still probably the best. The other ones were still fine. They were all like, I did better with Reanimator when Deathrite Shaman was around. I thought it was actually better positioned back then than it is now. I don't think the format's become more open. I think it's just about the same. Like, you have the same.
Don't you feel like, I think the argument that people, including me, would be making is that like the gap between the most powerful former Deathrite Shaman decks like Grixis Delver and Grixis Control and the rest of the format has gotten a lot closer. For example,
I don't think so. I just think more people played Deathrite Shaman deck. I mean, if you weren't playing Grixis Delver, you were playing Elves, and you're still playing it, right? And does it feel like so much more weak?
It feels like it feels a lot better, to be honest.
Okay. And Bob, you're playing Deathrite Shaman. You're playing Delver. Does it feel like that much worse without Deathrite Shaman in this format than it did in the other one? I mean, Were you winning 10% more with Deathrite Shaman? I kind of doubt that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I was winning around the same amount. So that you make a good point there, in that I don't think my win rate with approximately the same deck has appreciably changed.
Right.
What has changed is I'm facing way fewer mirrors and way more of the random decks.
Yeah, this is because of the rhetoric around Deathrite Shaman was that it's the best deck and you have to play that. But really, it wasn't. It's basically the same.
So Black Dark Reanimator was the best deck? Because that's what you
I actually thought it was at the time, yes. But that's I don't need to get into that, because I mean, I'm not going to argue that I'm right about that. I felt it was the best deck at the time. I had the best win percentage with it. I played a lot of Grixis Delver. I had a good win percentage with that as well. Show. But I found Black Red to be a little better after I learned how to play it better. But like, if you look at top 8s of Deathrite Shaman Legacy, there is no indication that Deathrite Shaman Grixis Delver was oppressive. Like, the top 8s look almost exactly the same as they do today.
Well, see, that's the point I dispute you on, is that, like, Grixis Delver was probably putting up twice the number of top 8s when Deathrite was legal.
Well,
so, I mean, obviously that could just be because, like, more people were playing it.
All right, well, I just looked at... yeah, I think that your data has a lot isn't just top 8s, right? And a lot of it's from challenges. So I just clicked on like the last couple of major legacy events when Deathrite Shaman was legal, and the top 8 was Storm, Death and Taxes, Dragon Stompy, Stoneblade, Grixis Delver, Miracles, UB Reanimate, UR Delver. And the last Star City now was Azorius Delver, Dimir Death Shadow, which is a Delver deck, Dimir Delver, Grixis Control, Sneak and Show, Miracles, Azorius, Stoneblade, Death, and I didn't just look at 2. I looked at a bunch of them, and they all look pretty much the same.
Well, what the point is for me, it's much less about Grixis Delver, which I think I would even say was the best deck, but I could be wrong. I could agree to somebody saying, well, maybe it was actually some kind of depth deck that would have been the best in that kind of metagame, but that's past. For me, it's more about Grixis Control. I feel Grixis Control invalidated a lot of like mid-range strategies, because it was like this brutal, slow but not too slow moving bulldozer that just like drowned you so much in card advantage. That was even because it was like a very broad deck. It didn't have like a very focused strategy. It was really just like all about card advantage.
So yeah,
you couldn't really attack it very well. Like, even if you brought in stuff like Choke, at some point, like, I'm still to this day not sure whether I should even bring in Choke with elves against them, because like they can play around that very well. And at some point, which felt like the most degenerate moment in Legacy, people played Blood Moon in their 4-color deck and was actually decent. That just felt like too much for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can look at even like Bob's numbers, and I don't think they would show that 4C control was oppressive like whatsoever. But I do think the banning of Deathrite Shaman has made that deck terrible. So I think banning Deathrite Shaman has made some strategies either much, much worse or completely unplayable. For example, like, you don't see any more Food Chain, which was a fringe deck, and that's not the reason they banned Deathrite Shaman. But that's basically unplayable, I think. And 4-color control has become like drastically worse. But I don't think it was oppressive, and I don't think there's any numbers that show that it was.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like to give you like not a stats-backed analysis. I just feel like in the pre-Deathrite Shaman meta, or like during Deathrite Shaman itself, it felt there were many fewer decks that you could actually play and expect to do well with. And like, you honestly, to a certain degree, I almost sometimes felt stupid playing elves. Not so much because I think the deck could still compete, but if I compared win rates, for example, this is just on elves, I'm winning a lot more. Like, a lot more. And yeah, I didn't expect that, even though like I was like, if Deathrite Shaman gets banned, I think I want to see that, but I wasn't like, oh yeah, this needs to go, like I used to be with Top. But overall, I really enjoy like what Legacy is like right now, because I feel like outside of having, like Bob mentioned, having an answer to like very fast, dedicated linear strategies, I feel like I can play and beat almost anything.
I mean, you went to tournaments with elves when Deathrite Shaman was legal, and you won those tournaments.
Yeah, I did, but I sometimes lost, and I didn't.
Yeah. But the same thing's happened since then, right? I mean, you've been to tournaments and didn't win. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that there are more playable decks. I do think you probably you don't face turn 1 Deathrite Shaman as much as you used to because it's banned. But other than that, I mean, you're still seeing Delver decks more than almost anything. And the control decks, you're not seeing 4-color control anymore. Not much, but a little bit. You're seeing Grixis control, which is worse. But you're seeing about as much Miracles as you were before they banned Deathrite Shaman. You're seeing more of a variety of Delver decks, which makes things maybe more interesting and more fun. But really, those games, like Grixis Delver with or without Deathrite Shaman, they pretty much play out the same, right?
I don't feel like they play out the same, because like Bob is arguing from the stats-based thing, like where he's saying actually it got more diverse. I'm more arguing from the point of view like of gameplay, because I feel like both playing Grixis control and playing against Grixis control, it always felt not very deep. To me, like the deck, I've called it like the chunt deck of control decks, because it feels like almost like a tap-out control deck at times, and that's just, maybe that's different for other people, but to me, I feel that kind of playstyle is really boring to me. Like,
yeah, I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of it. I didn't like it when Deathrite Shaman was legal. I also didn't think it was that great. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not very good at it, which is possible, because I did try it and I never found it to be like that great. But people are still playing that style of deck.
But they're not playing Leovold anymore, and I think that's also a big part. Like Leovold was.
Well,
like,
I am still seeing a little bit of Leovold, but Leovold's like fringe now. Yeah, Leovold was really good against elves.
Against elves, but as well as like against other decks. Like if you were able to stick Leovold, if you wanted to come back against that card, it's actually surprisingly hard.
Yeah, no, it was a really good card. I think that was one of the things though that like. I mean, are you happy? Why wouldn't? Are we happy that Leovold's gone? I thought that card was kind of cool. I don't know. I guess it was only in super greedy decks, and that's what Deathrite Shaman enabled. But
yeah, I also feel like it's cool that people don't get to almost for free play 3 colors and then even splash the 4th color and Blood Moon at times anymore.
Yeah,
because like the ideal format, and of course that's like different for everyone, to me is like where playing 2 colors is reasonable and 3 colors is quite the cost. And it didn't really feel like that anymore. And I think that's, like, I don't argue for color diversity. I don't even argue for deck diversity, even though that's like a result of what I'm actually arguing for, and that's like playstyle diversity. I want fast, aggressive decks. I want like some tap-out control decks. I want some hardcore control decks like Miracles. I want some like mid-range combo decks like Elves. I want also like dedicated mid-range decks like Maverick. And I felt like some of those strategies were significantly worse when Deathrite Shaman, especially in Grixis control, was around. I'm not that like Grixis Delver, I feel, was the overall best deck, especially to play in a big tournament. But Grixis control, I just felt like it was so stupid and boring to play against, and that's just my main thing that I'm happy that we are relieved of.
So that's interesting. I think a lot of people who had a backlash against my article, they were upset that decks like Grixis Control had gotten noticeably worse, because they really wanted to play those blue mirrors because they felt that they were highly interactive. So what a lot of people are complaining about is like if Legacy is I called it a turn 2 format in many ways, because after the first 2 turns, maybe 3 turns, like one player can be significantly ahead. In particular, if they're playing like mana accelerants like Ancient Tomb or Mox Diamond. So kind of going back to that a little bit, I think like that's been the core change, is that like the blue decks lost the mana accelerants. Now that's kind of the domain of the non-blue decks. There's some blue decks, obviously, you know, Phoenix has Dark Ritual, Storm has Dark Ritual, Sneak Control has Ancient Tomb, but those are mostly unfair blue decks. And so I guess my next thing would be like, I agree 100% with Julian. I don't really care about color diversity. I care about strategic diversity. And I think, to an extent, the banning of Deathrite Shaman has opened up strategic diversity. Unfortunately, I think it's opened it up in such a way that, like, Brainstorm is still kind of the best card, or the best, like, mid to late game engine. So that means that in order to compete with the Brainstorm decks, a lot of these decks are pushing really hard to be really effective in, like, the turn 1, 2, 3 window before, like, Brainstorm can become, like, overpowerful. So like that's kind of what has happened, is that the format's become a lot faster. So instead of seeing more like decks like Maverick pop up, we're seeing more decks like Dark Depths and like Storm and Reanimator. So from like that point of view, and still Legacy doesn't have a true aggro deck. Like Eldrazi aggro and like Delver are, I guess, the closest, but neither of them are just like both of them have like a significant amount of just like disruptive like chalice pieces or like Daze Force of Will. So there still isn't like a zoo deck. So I don't know. Like I would be hoping for some printings that like bolster archetypes that are like bolster cards like Green Sun Zenith and Sylvan Library, which allow decks to play longer games against the blue decks, while not being the stupid like turn 1 to 2 gotcha decks, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I don't totally agree.
I think Dark Depths was better when Deathrite Shaman was around because that was one of its best matchups. And for me, Black Red Reanimator was better when Deathrite Shaman was around because that was a fine matchup and the metagame was better for Reanimator. Storm won like a GP with Deathrite Shaman around. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing any of that. I'm seeing that the format's basically the same. Like you said, people are still playing blue decks. They're playing against each other with blue decks. The Chalice decks are one of the best ways to fight that. That's the same as it was. I mean, the last GP with Deathrite Shaman was won by Mono Red Stompy. Mono Red Stompy is probably still the best Chalice deck because Delver decks are the most popular strategy. Maverick and decks like that, I'm seeing just as much online as I was before Deathrite Shaman and after Deathrite Shaman. Those strategies are fine. They were never great, and they're still not great, but they're fine. And people who are good with those decks probably, I'm imagining, winning about the same as they were with or without Deathrite Shaman around.
It's interesting because, like, you would think if one was to agree with Eric, you would imagine maybe there's some kind of narrative. Like, people, they hear online that their deck is worse, so they play it less, and at the same time they start playing different decks.
I think the narrative was about Deathrite Shaman Delver being the best deck, and I think that deck rewarded and still rewards just basic good Magic playing. So like people who are not necessarily playing a ton of Legacy all the time, but want to play a Legacy tournament and they are good at Magic, like the kind of people who win tournaments, are going to play that deck, and they're still going to play that deck.
So is there anything you don't enjoy about Legacy right now, Eric? Format-wise?
I mean, I don't like playing against the card Chalice of the Void, but otherwise, like I love Legacy, and I like it now, and I liked it before, and I think it's really, really close to the same. I kind of miss playing with Deathrite Shaman because it was pretty fun to play with, but as far as the changes in the format due to it, I'm not seeing that many. Nothing drastic.
That's an interesting perspective. Like, I don't know. I guess what I'm seeing is like basically more people are playing the combo decks, really, that the combo decks and the Chalice decks that like were previously playing the blue decks. Like I think that's what I'm seeing. And I'm not saying
that the people playing Storm and stuff are the same people that were playing it before they banned Deathrite Shaman. I don't think the people winning with Storm, I think it's the exact same people. Like, it's not more or less people or people switching to it. It's the same people playing it. And Reanimator, I think I might have popularized it by winning a bunch of trophies with it. But it was better when Deathrite Shaman was around. And Depths, I think if you talk to any of the Depths players, and I'm sure a lot of them are listening, I think they would tell you that the format was better for Depths before they banned Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah.
And so
I think Depths could be true. Reanimator could be true. I think most Storm players I talked to said the deck got better with the banning of Probe because they actually found the deck to be way more consistent now that they have Preordain and Thoughtseize. Like those Preordain and Thoughtseize are kind of like clean, like 7 or 8 rating kind of cards, whereas Probe and Therapy could vary wildly from like a 5 to a 10. So they found the deck more consistent now. Added to that, like Deathrite Shaman was like somewhat effective against Storm, so like losing that was helpful. And Julian was saying Elves feels a lot stronger now too. So I think they're like maybe some decks like Depths and Reanimator didn't get better with the banning, but I think some decks definitely did.
I just not to provide the F's perspective. Like obviously in absolute power, of course, everybody lost out, but in relative power, I feel it's better. Like, I actually won the very first big tournament, the MKM in Prague, after Deathrite Shaman was banned. And I feel that we're also facing less hate, like incidental hate, that people used to have from the Grixis Delver mirror. Like, over the past 6 months, I think I was, like, Marsh casualtied, like, 3 times at most. And also Toxic Deluge, I see a lot less, which a lot of people used to have in their 4-color control decks. And that's just something like nobody really sideboards dedicated hate against elves because like I think in your let me check your numbers, elves is like
it's like 3%.
3.1, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Like you don't bring in cursed totems, but you did face a lot of incidental hate from the Grixis Delver Grixis Delver matchups, as well as like the Grixis control decks, who I think had more dedicated sideboard cards against Death and Texas.
You know what I think that is, now that you mention it? I think it was because Deathrite Shaman made it so you could cast True Name Nemesis on turn 2, which meant everybody needed to have answers to that, because True Name Nemesis is like a difficult card to beat on turn 2. And now people are casting it on like turn 5. So that is a pretty big difference as far as incidental hate goes.
Yeah, and added to that, I think like I would not play a double black spell in my Grixis Delver deck anymore unless I were to like run like 4 black sources, because it's just like too much of a liability in mirrors. And against other wasteland decks, it's just very hard to cast. Whereas Deathrite Shaman really enabled, oh, you want to play this double black spell? Sure, it's basically free.
Yeah. I've had the same experience when playing Maverick. I think Maverick was actually one of the secretly better decks than people thought about it during the Deathrite Shaman meta. But I think right now, Maverick is still quite good. But you face a lot less hate, and just overall, that's like basically if you know me, I'm coming from the mid-range combo crowd, and I just want these decks to do well because I feel they are very, very healthy for the metagame, as opposed to, I guess, Chalice is not really actually providing a service to the metagame, even though I'm still opposed to like when people say they want Chalice banned. I'm not on board with that. At least I understand why they want that, but overall, I just feel like it's a reasonable card. Oh god, people are gonna quote me on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like obviously it doesn't feel fun to stare down a turn 1 Chalice and then just lose, like, or be so far behind that it's almost impossible to recover. But it is a little bit of a counterbalance to the metagame, and it like adds some diversity. So I'm on board with that. But again, I'm with Julian. I want more of these probably quote unquote like slightly bad like decks like Maverick.
You can mention elves, that's fine.
Yeah, sure. Maverick and elves. I don't love elves. My personal pet peeve is playing against decks that take a long time or a lot of game actions, and I have to sit there. So elves is like right on the cusp of that with your Glimpse Chains.
You must hate High Tide.
High Tide is my least favorite deck ever. Storm I'm okay with because it takes very little time and it's deterministic. Yeah, I mean, I want to see more unique strategies in Legacy, and to an extent, we've gotten that recently.
Well, we've also gotten rid of some because there were some unique strategies that played Deathrite Shaman that are unplayable anymore, like Food Chain and
like
Alluring. You don't really see any. Yeah.
Yep. No, that's fair. That's fair. You definitely did lose a little bit of those mid-rangey blue decks, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I would like to see like a better zoo type deck.
That's never going to happen. You know, we're seeing a more of a variety of Delver decks.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think like a zoo type deck could happen if there's another printing similar to Thalia, but like fit really well in the zoo strategy, for example.
Jund was like semi-playable till they banned Deathrite Shaman.
It was playable for I would say Jund was playable for a period. Back in like 2013, 2014, and then I think it like just didn't get quite enough tools.
Well, it went from being like you could play it in leagues and expect to do okay with it, or you could take it to like an SCG if you wanted. If you were into that deck, you could play it and you could expect to do okay with it. It was fine. It was okay against Delver, and expect to play that again a bunch. Now it's completely unplayable. Like you can't play that. Same with black, white, Picula or whatever they call.
Dead Gael?
Yeah, Dead Gael. That deck's... There's just no build to that deck you can really play anymore. I liked playing that deck. That deck was a lot of fun. It's super fair. Deathrite Shaman deck.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, my point is, like, I want there to be new printings to maybe make Brainstorm decks a little bit worse. But I don't want cards like Chalice of the Void or, like, new Grizzlebrand. I want, like, cards like Sylvan Library, Green Sun Zenith, maybe Thalia, but not happy with that one. But like cards, maybe like Eidolon of the Great Revel, but like, you know, more generally for aggro decks, for example, like those would be the cards that I would be really excited to see.
I think you're dreaming though. I mean, I think that that Delver is going to be able to fight against any of these types of things that they could possibly print, unless they like say on the card this is uncounterable and doesn't get targeted by lightning bolt. Like Delver can fight against anything like that. So except for Chalice of the Void, which so then you got to deal with playing against decks.
Well,
that
okay, let's take an example. I've been playing Hollow One in Modern, and I actually think it's a really strong deck, and it could maybe even be ported over to Legacy. But the main problem is that like it's the combo decks that are the problem, not necessarily the Delver decks, because in order to beat combo, you really just need like powerful effects that like Thalia that like almost win the game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
If I may interrupt you there, I try a lot of wonky shit on Magic Online, and sometimes I even stream it. And maybe you guys saw me play like what I called Value Elves, which is basically like a goblin version of Elves, where you play like Sylvan Messenger and 4 Beast Whisperers. And it's really just like this grindy deck, and I've never felt that like Delver was really my limiting factor with how well I could do with the deck. It was actually always combo. Like I feel whenever you're playing a deck that's reasonable against Delver and that's not blue, and not playing Chalice, then combo is always going to be a struggle. Because Delver is the kind of matchup you can buy a lot of time against Delver. And like buying time against Delver with stuff like, I don't know, Carpet of Flowers, Meekstone, whatever, like even Cavern, that time they can never make up. They have to eventually, like, they're gonna remove the Meekstone or they're gonna have enough critical mass, but then they still have to beat you. Whereas when you're playing against combo, once they get rid of whatever's stopping them from winning, they win immediately. And that's why it feels like if you're playing a non-blue deck against combo, I always feel like that's like, how would you call it? That's like the one thing that's keeping a deck out of the metagame for me right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that like, for example, the Goblins community was really excited when they banned Deathrite Shaman because they thought that their lackey was not very good because they couldn't get through Deathrite Shaman. But it turns out that their lackey's not very good because turn 1 Gristlebrand is a thing. Like, I think those decks they can't beat combo is the problem. And maybe Deathrite Shaman made it so that their best matchup was not as good as it could have been, but it doesn't make those decks better in the format overall.
Yeah, no, I agree with Eric that it's going to be hard to see any like real traction for decks like Maverick, Goblin, Zoo, but I can hope at least.
I actually want to try out Zoo. I've been thinking about Zoo for a while, and I still think it's really not there, like not even like tier 3. But I kind of want to see what happens if you start showing up with like turn 1, I don't know, Wild Nacatl, turn 2 Quasali Pride Mage, attack you for 4, like bolt your blocker, whatever, what have you. It's probably not going to be great.
Alright, this is what Zoo needs. Zoo needs like a Mox Amber, but it only works in Zoo somehow. Then I think it could be good.
Oh, we should be working at R&D.
I want to play Dead Gael again. That deck was fun.
Well, those decks play like Chrome Mox, which is just a horrible card, but it does sort of offer what they are kind of looking for.
Yeah.
Bob mentioned that he feels like we need more non-blue decks that I want to say like decrease variance, like Green Sun Synod, Sylvan Library, and I wonder whether Wizards' new dedication to having more flexible cards is maybe gonna add some of that, because like if they do best of 1 in an arena, they are gonna print more cards that are more flexible, like split cards and stuff. And the problem with split cards is always like both sides are overcosted, and because of that, not great against Delver. But maybe a card slips through, and that can become playable in Legacy. Who knows?
Well, like I think there have been a couple, right? Like Abrade, I think is one that comes to mind that is seeing a good amount of play. I'm trying to think of any other notable ones. I feel like there's at least one other, but I don't know.
There must be more, yeah. But
Hooligan's
maybe we're gonna see
not
more in
that
the future,
old.
even.
Yeah. You guys want to talk about the new potential proposed mulligan rule now?
The so-called London mulligan. Yeah, it was announced very recently at their latest stream, and it's going to be in effect for just one tournament. But if it does well, they will introduce it for all of Magic. And they clearly pointed out not only like certain formats, but they actually made a conscious decision. If it's going to come, it's going to be here for all of Magic. And Bob, do you want to explain how that mulligan rule works?
Sure. So under the new rules, every time you mulligan, you actually, how it works is you mulligan and then you draw 7 cards. Then, say you mulligan once, then you pick one card from your hand and you put it on the bottom of your library. Then you decide if you want to keep that 6 or not. So basically, it's akin to right now when you mulligan, you get a scry, which is sort of like an opt. This one is more like when you mulligan, you get a brainstorm, and you get to basically put the cards that you don't like and put them on the bottom of your library, which is kind of effectively shuffling them away. So it makes it much, much better to mulligan. And I think like the biggest gainers from this rule, in Legacy at least, are the Chalice of the Void decks, and to a lesser extent, some of the combo decks like Reanimator and Dredge definitely benefit a lot because they mulligan a fair amount. But on the flip side, it is also easier to find hate for those decks in the post-board games, which I think are going to be more important. So I'm not sure how it's going to work for those decks, but to me the biggest winners are definitely like the Chalice Leyline decks. And if you look at like Vintage, I think that Dredge obviously gets a massive boost, and Shops does as well, whereas the blue decks don't necessarily see as much of a boost. So that's my first impression.
Yeah, Shops is interesting. I actually didn't thought about how it's going to change for Shops, but I played my fair amount of Shops, and yeah, there's like many hands where you really only feel like you need Workshop and then like 2 pieces of hate and then whatever, you're probably going to get there. But sometimes like your hands look really sketchy. With regards to Dredge, I think I've read the numbers that it used to be like, including Serum Powder, you were like 95% to find Bazaar, and in practice that number was maybe even a little lower because you don't want to Serum Powder hands that have like 3 or 4 like bridges. But now it's closer to like 99% to actually find Bazaar. But on the flip side, you're also much more likely to, not much more likely, but more likely to also find Leyline against them. But of course, they're also more likely to keep hands that have like Bazaar, Dredger, Land, and removal for Leyline. So we got some numbers of that, like our friends Min and Max Gilmore on their blog. I think it's called, is it minmaxblog.com? We're going to provide it in the show notes. They ran the numbers on a couple of those things. And for example, if you want to get a Chalice of the Void on turn 1 in like a Stompy type of deck, I think they did the numbers for Moon Stompy, which also includes Simian Spirit Guide. It used to be that around 50%, actually I think it was for Eldrazi, so no Spirit Guides. Anyway, it used to be under the current Mulligan rule, you're about to get a Chalice of the One on the first turn 50% of the time if you mulligan for it. Whereas under the new proposed rule, it's closer to 60%, which like overall is like a 20% increase. So like 20 out of 100 more games, you basically, or 1-5 games, you get a Chalice of the Void that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. And I agree that the boost that the opposing deck gets is probably not as big as that, because the opposing deck usually, especially on the draw, they need like Force of Will plus Pitch and a reasonable hand, or be a deck that doesn't care about Chalice, of course. So I totally agree that that's gonna give a boost to those decks, but overall, I still feel like I'm kinda liking this, because like what Wizard said is their intention is to decrease the number of so-called non-games, and I do feel that was influenced by LSV mulliganing to, I think, 4 in Game 5 of the last Pro Tour, which Andrew Ellenbogen ended up winning. Hey, Cardboard Life, hey. Anyway. And I feel like, I think it's a good thing, and actually it's a kind of mulligan rule that feels very intuitive to how I feel it should be, because right now I feel in Legacy, mulliganing is a pretty big deal. Like when I mulligan to 6 on the play, I feel really behind unless I'm playing a combo deck, like a dedicated combo deck, not a critical mass combo deck like F's, but also in other decks. Like if I play the Miracle's Mirror or something, like I mulligan to 5 or 6 on the play, it just feels so bad, and I think that's gonna help with that a little bit at least.
I don't agree with you.
Oh, of course, that's why you're on the cast, right?
I think it's going to be great
from Thailand. That we
I think it's going to be great. Great for limited, because like you don't mulligan that often in limited already, just because it's so bad. You just mulligan when you don't have a functional hand, basically. So then now your first mulligan's almost always going to work out, and then you just get rid of your worst card. So that's great, right? And that's going to definitely reduce the number of non-games, and probably in Standard too. I don't play a ton of Standard, so I think it's great there. But in Legacy, it's just going to increase the number of non-games, because it's going to benefit only the decks that create non-games. So like Chalice decks and decks that play 2-card combos. Because the other decks all play cantrips, and you're incentivized not to mulligan to certain cards because you're playing cantrips. So it's only going to benefit the decks that want non-games. And Elves is kind of up there.
But does Chalice actually create a non-game just because you get it on the first turn?
Yes, that's exactly when it's like a non-game against the blue deck. I'm looking at my hand and it's like, okay, cool. Like I have one spell that does
the whole reason you play Chalice is that it's basically a one-card combo against a lot of decks.
But which decks really? Like I can see Miracles.
Every cantrip deck.
Not even all that much. Yeah, every cantrip deck.
Yeah, because the whole cantrip deck thing is that your cantrips find certain cards, and if you remove 30% of your deck, which is the cantrips, then you're just naturally finding your cards, but your deck isn't built to do that.
We were talking about that in Blue Chat, and like the one thing I was looking to explore was, so why don't we play cards that cost 2? And Bob made a pretty good point about actually the one thing that's stopping us is Delver. Because the thing is, mana, I don't know how you put it, you said like mana is the axis we fight on, and if we voluntarily increase our mana cost, we are inherently going to be weaker, even though the spells might become a little better, but like we lose out on tempo, and then we get probably punished by Delver. I'm just wondering, like, maybe... Sorry. If it, like, to me, if more Chalice ends up incentivizing people to play less cantrips, I feel that's a good thing. Even though I think the problem is that not enough people would be playing Chalice to actually make that a reasonable thing. Like, you always have this problem if you have like a strong strategy, but not enough people are playing it, then you're not incentivized to actually like change your main deck because of that, and then you're just trying to avoid it. So every time you run to Chalice, you feel like, oh, I lost the coin flip, but better luck next round. I think that's the problem, because overall, I don't think Chalice is that big of a problem. Like, Chalice is really only a problem like on the first turn, because if you're on the play and your opponent has Chalice, there's so many ways you can fight over that.
The problem with Chalice is that against cantrip decks, a lot of the time you literally cannot play a game of Magic because you're a cantrip deck, and even like Delver, your win cons are also 1 mana, so you don't get to play any Magic at all.
So maybe you should play more cards in the main deck that deal with Chalice.
Okay, but then what? How are you gonna play 7 of them? Like you're removing cantrips.
Then you get 4 forces, and then you got like, I don't know.
But your cantrips find the answers to the Chalice, and so the Chalice makes it so you can't find the answers. Like that's like in the sideboard games.
Chalice is pretty weak if the opponent has like 8 answers to Chalice, even on the draw.
Yeah, but there's no way you're building a blue deck with 8 answers to Chalice.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe that's where we are going. And I think we are not going there because not enough people are playing Chalice to make it worth it. But I would love to see that. I mean, maybe like more mid-range focus.
That becomes a little bit like how Shops is in Vintage. You know how like blue decks sideboards are just 8 graveyard hate and then like 6 artifact hate and like 2 cards for blue decks. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's the beauty of Chalice, because like Chalice is easier to hate than the Graveyard. Graveyard requires like very dedicated cards, whereas Chalice, like, speaking on the play, if you have Spell Pierce, that's like you're good to go. But even stuff like a Braid or Engineered Explosives, I feel like is pretty good against playing against Chalice. It's a little bit slow, but so be it. Like, they got the turn on Chalice, they gotta have some kind of.
How many of those are you gonna play though?
Probably 4 first of all, and then like 3 or 4 in the main deck. And then you're probably
4 cards that
to actually have it.
Answer Chalice.
Yeah, of course.
Because Chalice got better with the new mulligan rule. That seems That seems awful to me.
No, I think
those cards don't do anything against so many things. Like a Braid, it's like such a bad card in the main deck.
That's what I'm saying. You play a Braid, you play Engineered Explosives, and it's gonna be better because the format is gonna be slower. Like,
what's gonna happen when you get turn 1 reanimated?
That's okay. That happens. That's why sideboards are for. Like, the cards you're playing in that spot, they won't help you too much anyway. Like your Ponder or your Preordain or whatever. But I'm just basically coming from a point of view. Okay, maybe that's a bit revisionist, but I want to go back to what Legacy was like before Delver and Griselbrand, where it was a little slower, where you could play like Rock Swarmonk and shit.
You and Bob should make your own format, where Bob gets to create new cards that he can get with Green Sun Zenith, and you get to play old Legacy, and you guys can make your own ban list. It's like a local EDH scene where everybody has their own ban list.
Yeah, that's my Legacy. Yeah, I would think so. It's just like this is where I want to go back, because the Delver has changed. Like, Delver and Combo are the 2 big police forces in Legacy that limit what you can play. Maybe Storm even more, but with regards to like playing a more mid-rangey game, I think if Delver didn't exist, I could play more hate against Storm. And of course, you could also argue the other way around. If Storm didn't exist, you could play more hate against Delver. It's just like, I feel like Delver is putting a really strong grip on what you can like play and get away with. Like, And that's why I don't hate it if Derva gets a little weaker overall as a strategy.
But if it's being replaced by Chalice, is that better or worse?
I think that's okay, because like the legacy, basically the legacy I imagine that's cool is where you can play Knight of the Reliquary and not feel bad for it. That's how I've always put it. I don't know if you guys heard it. I think I've said it on the podcast before. I want to go back to a kind of legacy where you play Knight of the Reliquary and you feel good about it.
I mean, you can play Knight of the Reliquary.
Yeah, people are doing that now.
Yeah, if you play a card that lets you like, yeah, exactly. If you play Chalice with it, or if you play like, Mox Diamond and have it on turn 1 or 2, then it's a good card.
Yeah, let me play Noble Hierarch.
Yeah, people are doing that. Yeah. Maverick is fine. You've played it. You did a video with it, didn't you? Do all right?
Yeah, I think Green Red Maverick is pretty fine.
Yeah,
but it could be better. Like,
but I mean, back to the mulligan thing. I think so. I think you're kind of like living in this fantasy world where certain things are going to change Magic in general. Like people are still going to be playing the powerful cards that are powerful now, not the ones that were powerful 10 years ago, But the mulligan is just going to incentivize people to play more decks that are non-interactive decks and that are looking for 1 or 2 specific cards every game.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, and why I was shocked that they like literally came out and said that they didn't test it for anything outside of Standard and Limited, and they're kind of using the Mythic Championship as guinea pigs essentially. But I think they might need to go a step further, and maybe I'll tweet at them. But I think like Modern is a really good testing ground, and it could be very broken in Modern, maybe even more so in Legacy and Vintage. But if it's fine in Modern, I don't think that necessarily means it's fine in Legacy or Vintage. So I think they should like have like a big MCQ or some other big event also that weekend to test Legacy and Vintage as well. Because I think those are also very different formats. I think Vintage is the one I'm most concerned about, just because of Bazaar and Workshop. But I think obviously Legacy, it's going to be a huge change as well.
Yeah, I think that my guess is that they're going to do this thing with Modern, and then they're not going to use this mulligan rule.
Yeah, I mean in Modern, I think it's like extremely busted with Dredge and Tron especially. Like Tron is literally going to have turn 3 Tron like 80-90% of the time now. And literally Tron, like the only problem is sometimes you just mulligan and then you couldn't find it. Now it's that probability is just like so far reduced. So that deck is going to be even more ridiculous than it already is.
At Dredge or Tron, the 2 kind of decks you would be looking to register for the Mythic Championship in London?
Well, I'm not going, but
no, I know.
Yeah, if I were, then I would definitely start with the decks that got a noticeable improvement from the new rule, because not enough people are going to have adequate testing for that rule. I really feel bad for all the people going to that Mythic Championship, because A, they're playing the limited portion is a pre-release, so the only way they can test that is if they like find some program that allows them to like I guess on Magic Online maybe we'll be able to play it for a few days before the MC, but you would have to find like another program that like has the draft cards available even before like that if you want to test it, if you want to give it any real amount of testing. Plus then with the Modern side you really need a team. At least you can at least test it with a team, but it's going to be interesting to see if like maybe the enfranchised players with big testing teams are going to do even better than usual.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really lopsided in that sense. I expect there to be like clearly broken decks that some teams find based on the new mulligan rule.
Yeah, I'm with Eric. Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm like 50-50 because I think on one hand it's like a very interesting rule, and it's like you're giving these decks a brainstorm. It's not like you're giving them like Ancestral Recall or whatever. So I could see a world that it doesn't break the format, but it does, skew things even more to Chalice. Like for example, it's 15%, maybe it becomes like 25%. Like I could see that being a world that could be okay, but it also could just be like completely bonkers in certain like strategies that it's just like something we should avoid. So we'll see.
Yeah, I might totally be biased because I always feel like Fs is definitely gonna stand to benefit from that rules change, because like the Fs is probably the deck that mulligans the worst in all of Legacy, just because you only have like 14 initial mana sources, and a lot of times you really try to avoid mulligan just because you might mulligan again, and that would be like super bad. And still, I'm just excited because like I'm not that happy about how impactful like mulligans are in Legacy, and some people also mentioned that like being on the play or the draw is like a big difference, and that's something that Wizards should address at some point, which is probably like more pronounced in Vintage and Legacy than it is in like in the other formats, maybe even Modern to a certain degree.
So I was talking to BBD, and he, having played all the formats, he was pretty certain that Standard was the most play draw dependent, which I think is super interesting. But I agree. I think like a cool rule would be like if you're on the draw, you get a scry. Just start there, kind of, because like Lotus Petals would just be way too powerful. Like that's how Hearthstone is.
It's abusive.
But a scry I think could be, you know, a step in the right direction for being on the draw. You get a free scry. I think that could be interesting too. But then again, like we're getting to the point where like, you know, how much variance do we want in Magic? Because the answer is not 0. Otherwise, we would be better off playing something like chess. And I think a big reason, like Artifact, that game didn't take off, was that it was so complicated and like skill intensive that like a lot of people were just turned off by the complexity. So like I definitely think you want some variance for newer players to be able to like pick it up and win games. The question is really just how much. So.
Yeah, I think that's what it really comes down to. Like, you want to decrease variance a little bit, but at the same time, like you guys mentioned, you might actually increase it by making Chalice. It's interesting. You're making Chalice decks more consistent, thereby increasing the variance in the format with a change that was aimed at decreasing variance. Like, if I was to follow your line of arguing, which I can totally see being reasonable, even though maybe it's just like inside me, I want to be excited for it and want to see, like, I'm always a little excited for like big changes in Legacy, but I think eventually we will see how it works out. Like, it would be cool if you could actually test that, like even like in a custom league, but that's not really possible. But maybe people are like, gonna try that out on paper and give us some feedback.
I wish I could have, before doing this podcast, that I could have tested some out. I really wished I had that option available to me. But I didn't want to play on Cockatrice or something like that. It's not worth it.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to add for now?
No, I think that's it for me.
That's it for you? Okay, so are you guys gonna hop on the challenge? I think Eric already said he's not gonna play in the challenge. That's starting in half an hour.
It starts at 11 p.m. It seems pretty ambitious.
Yeah, too late for me. I never play them.
Okay, Bob, are you playing?
Probably not today. I was thinking about double queuing, but I decided to play the modern MCQ instead. Double queuing is just very stressful, and I'm gonna avoid that.
What are you playing?
Hollow One.
Hollow One. So good luck with that. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Eric, for coming on as a special guest.
Thanks for having me.
Evening. And yeah, if you like this podcast, let us know. This is actually the thing that we get the least feedback on, so I'm always happy that when we get feedback on the podcast, that would be really nice. We are recently also on Stitcher and Spotify if you want to like subscribe to us there. And thanks to our, well, I guess non-existent sponsors for the podcast.
We should work on that.
Oh, we should try. And now I really gotta run because I got a very special appointment. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.